Today, I'm sharing with you my sewing routine because one of the questions that you ask me the most is, Elisa, how can you make that time for sewing while having a full-time job, 4-month-old baby, running YouTube, and doing some other crafts on a regular basis like pottery painting, watercolors, card making, on top of actually taking care of the house and doing laundry and all the other stuff that you know better than I do. So today in this video, I would love to share with you some tips on how to make that sewing time possible, but be prepared. These tips will actually require some work. So if you really want to make that sewing time possible in your life, these tips will work some magic. I know they helped me and I know that these will help you as well. So let's get started. So first of all, any sewing begins with you, and it might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but in order for you to find that desired sewing time in your life, you actually have to find time to take care of yourself first. And I've learned that the hard way. About 4 months ago when I first had my baby girl, she was just about 2 weeks old, and I really needed some crafty time. And those of you who have kids, you know that the first 2 weeks are the most challenging. You're still, feeling the shock after giving birth. You're running on sleep deprivation. All of these things are so new to you. And of course, Elisa decided that yes, let's get some sewing time in. And for majority of us, sewing is a relaxing hobby. However, if you can't see straight where you're sewing, or if you can't really comprehend how the pattern pieces are going together, none of the sewing is going to be productive, relaxing, or enjoyable. So whatever that is, whether you're feeling stressed from a new relationship or from work or something else is going on in your life, just make sure that you take care of yourself first, and then sewing will come after that. Because, if sewing isn't fun and enjoyable, then what good is it? Sewing sequencing is one thing that's going to make your sewing 10 times faster, and I actually borrowed that concept from Starbucks. I used to work as a Starbucks store manager, so if any baristas or Starbucks store managers out there, say hi in the comments below for sure. So what is sewing sequencing? What I mean by that is, number one, when you are thinking about your projects, you think in advance. And I usually think about a month in advance, and I have my patterns or a list of patterns ready. Number two, I print them out all at the same time, I cut them out all at the same time, and I also sew them all at the same time. What that does for me is, number one, I'm not distracted. If all I'm doing today is taping the patterns, that's all I'm doing today. If all I'm doing today is cutting out the fabric, that's all I'm doing today. If all I'm doing during this session of sewing is sewing them together, that's all I'm doing today, right? You're kind of in the same mode of the task, and you're not going from taping to sewing, from sewing to cutting, from cutting to taping, and back and forth and back and forth. You're just kind of working in the blocks. And I know it doesn't sound super exciting or super inspiring or super sexy, but believe me, that really gets the job done, and quite frankly, it makes sewing so much easier. Now, another thing that I can suggest right over here is that when I do cut my patterns, I usually think in multiples. So if I want to make a t-shirt, I think in advance, do I need only a white t-shirt, or do I need a stripy t-shirt as well? Do I need a darker t-shirt for the fall of the next season? Can I make them in the same batch of sewing? Because once you make one garment, you kind of already have that, I don't want to say muscle memory, of course not, but you already have that experience. Okay, I've just made that pattern, so the next one is easier, and then the one after that is super easy to make. And also makes sewing so much faster. So remember, sewing sequencing, print them out in a batch, cut them in a batch, sew them in a batch. If you can make multiples of the same pattern, make multiples of the same pattern. That will also make it so much easier for you to plan your handmade wardrobes, and it's also going to prevent you from being tempted by seeing all the pretty things on Instagram that are super pretty, and some people might wear 25 dresses, in their wardrobe, but if you don't need those 25 dresses, it might be super tempting to create something beautiful in the moment that you actually are not going to wear anytime soon, or anytime at all for that reason. So sequencing is one thing that's going to make it super fast, super easy, and that's going to find you more time for sewing. Another thing that really helps me maximize my sewing time is creating a very well thought through, functional sewing room. And when I say this, I would like to stress the word functional versus pretty sewing room, because I know there's so many wonderful pictures on Instagram and Pinterest and so many wonderful videos on YouTube showcasing how beautiful can sewing rooms be. And I know that it might leave you feeling, oh, well, my sewing room is not that pretty, or my sewing room doesn't look picture perfect like other people's sewing room. And yes, I know it might make you feel like, well, you know what? It kind of steals away your creativity and your inspiration. However, I'm here to tell you that I will take a functional sewing room over a pretty one any day of the week. Why? Well, because I don't need hundreds of pretty items on my sewing table when I need to get the sewing done, right? Yes, I have a pegboard. It's organized. It might not be the prettiest thing out there, but it gets the job done. So whenever you are thinking through your sewing corner or your sewing room, don't necessarily think about how can I make it pretty. Think about how can I make it functional. You know, my sewing machine is right over here. My serger is on the other side. So that way when I sew and if I need to serge, all I have to do is just I have to scoot one seat over and here's my serger, right? So think about things like that will really make your sewing like this, like a breeze, because pretty things are not always that functional. So let's talk about patterns. I also have a little tip on patterns, and I don't want you to think that I don't ever experiment with my patterns or that I don't ever try anything new. I do. But if you know what really fits you well, if you know what really complements your figure, your body, and the curves that you have and all the other things that make you, if you know the patterns that are absolutely gorgeous on you, use those patterns over and over and over again. And it might seem like it can get boring. It can. However, what I do is, for example, you know, I have a simple sleeveless top pattern. You can add so many things to it. A flounce, you can add some sleeves, you can add ruffles, you can add peplum top, you can add buttons in the middle, so many things. And first of all, what's gonna do, it's gonna develop your creative courage and also, you know, give you a little bit of understanding of how the patterns work. And yes, the first time it might not work out the way you planned, but if you don't try, you will never know. And number two, it will also save you the time of printing so many new patterns, cutting out so many new patterns. If you already have one pattern that fits you really well and all you have to do is add a button plaque in the middle of it, then it's gonna be, I don't wanna say so much faster than printing out the new pattern, but it's gonna save you, you know, some time, a little bit, develop a new skill, save some paper for, for printing, and also maybe save some space as well, you know, not printing out piles and piles and stacks of new patterns. You just use one that really fits you well, that you can modify in so many ways. So, you know, making tried and true patterns really saves some time. Yes, experiment for sure, try new things for sure, but if you really have found what works for you, then use it to your advantage. Here's another one. Stop multitasking. And I know it sounds super counterintuitive, I get it, but what I mean by that is not put in the laundry and then go and do the sewing. Laundry will take care of itself. All you gotta do is take it out of the washer and put it in the dryer. That's an easy multitasking thing, okay? What I mean by that is stop watching the baby and trying to do the sewing, or stop trying to watch the TV show while you're actively sewing, because those tasks that ask for your undivided attention, they ask for your undivided attention for a reason, right? And if you divide that attention with two tasks that really require your attention in the moment, then none of them are going to be completed to the level that you really desire. And I found out to be true when I used to listen to the podcast while actively sewing, and then I realized that I was trying to sew less because the sewing machine was so noisy, I couldn't really hear the podcast, and I was trying to listen more than I was sewing, and one simple top was taking me longer and longer and longer and longer to complete when I could have done that in like 2 hours, right? So definitely try to make sure that if you're actively sewing, dedicate your time and your attention to actively sewing. It's different when you are taping the patterns together or you're cutting them out. Those are quiet tasks, and during those you can listen to the podcast. I still don't recommend you watching TV shows, because then you're watching and cutting, and it just takes longer and longer and longer, and you end up not enjoying either of the activities. So definitely think about that. It might not be true for everybody, everybody, but it works for me and it doesn't hurt to try. All right, now it's your turn. Let me know in the comments below what is your tip for a productive sewing time and what is your tip on maximizing your sewing time and finding that time to create something beautiful for yourself. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that these tips were really useful. If they were, give it a thumbs up, enjoy and like this video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!